Hello, everyone, and great day. Today, we are joined by Tracy Borreson. Tracy and I are going to talk about personal branding, authentic connections, and the permission to do you. Tracy Borreson is a mompreneur and brand identity coach on a mission to help entrepreneurs align their business with their personal brand. The things that make up her personal brand include being a dancer, singing at the top of her lungs, all of her family time, fresh mountain air, a hot cup of tea, baking with her son, and making nerdy movie references. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Raven. I'm so excited to be here.
Tracy, I have been looking forward to talking with you because I just know you are going to bring the energy and the fun. So I'm super excited to have you. Well,
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So let's have all the energy.
let's go. Yes. So, one of the things that I thought was really interesting you told me is that during the pandemic, you had a work from home revelation. So,
I
tell us
did.
about that reset.
This is very fun. And I would guess there's actually quite a few people who have had similar types of experiences. Maybe they haven't reached the revelation point yet. So what happened for me? I think I was like a lot of other of families, right? Like, so my husband and I were both working full time. My son, who was just about 2, was in daycare full time. And I think that that is like pretty normal for a lot of working families. And when the pandemic hit and everybody went to work from home, I went to work from home, my husband went to work from home, the daycare closed. And so there was all of a sudden 3 of us in the house all together. Work 2 of us working from home, another one needing full-time care because he was only almost 2. And for those of you who have kids, I am sure you're imagining what that felt like. Maybe you experienced the same thing. The thing that became very apparent to me with my son being at home and I working while he was there was that every single minute I spent working was not a good trade for me. So every minute I spent feeling like I would rather be doing something different. And I think a lot of people think that that is what working is like, right? Like we get a job, we trade a certain amount of hours a day for a paycheck, and that is like that's just kind of the status quo. That's what we do. And for me, I had spent a very long time feeling like I was in the marketing industry. I was helping people sell products and services. Not that they were bad products and services, but it's just things that people don't really need, right? Like people could live without. Um, and so emotionally, it had been weighing on me for like quite honestly, probably 12 years at that point. And then coming into a place where every minute of that time is questioned, like it really became a I'm trading the time with my son for a paycheck. So is that worth it? Is that worth it? He's in his formative years. I could be creating memories with him. And I was also fairly confident that I could do something better with my time and get paid for something else. And so like that it was different people have different definitions of rock bottom, but in terms of like my career and where that was going, like I was done, right? Like this wasn't an investment I was willing to make anymore. And so I quit. I quit with no backup, no side gig, no. I just quit. Because that was what was best for me. And there's a couple of other times in my past where I have done the thing that was best for me because I had gotten to the quote unquote bottom of the barrel. And every single time, I mean, like now I don't know, theoretically, I'm a big believer that you don't have to hit rock bottom to change your trajectory. But I feel like even the science of inertia, right? Like unless something stops, you from going. You're going to keep going. You're just like on a trajectory. So like something has to stop you. And for me, it was COVID. And there's many things that I thank COVID for giving me that I still don't think I would have today if it wasn't for the pandemic. I think I would have, I don't think I would have had that revelation. And so I am thankful for that.
I think that's important that you talked about you did what was best for you.
Mhm.
I think one of the experiences I've am experiencing now and continuing to like lean into is that clarity of what do I want? And is this in alignment with my values? And when you talked about trading time for a paycheck or trading that quality family time, and also I knew I could be doing something better, bigger, having that tug, that inner tug. And so many of us, I think, have that inner guidance, but we ignore it or we don't listen to it, or, we make the excuse of, well, what about my pay, my income, my bills? But what about your happiness? What about your joy? What about what you said were your values? I think that is super important. And the fact that you said for 12 years, I've kind of known it's been there, it's been in the back of my head. Um, but I didn't take action on it until the pandemic kind of like woke a lot of people up. It's like,
Mhm.
this is something unprecedented time. I don't know how this ends out, how this continues to unfold, but I know that this is making me start to think about my own life, my own values, what's important, and what I want to do with the remainder of my time here on earth. So you quit. I want to
I did.
know, so, now what? You're like, oh, I'm done. I'm going to spend time with my son. Now what?
Well, and this is the interesting thing, right? So I'm Canadian. In Canada, we get a year of maternity leave. And so by the end of my year, I knew I didn't want to be a stay at home mom. Like, those people, as far as I'm concerned, are like super saints. And I'm not sure how they do it. My own mom among them, right? Like, whew, that was not something that was going to be my thing. And so I knew when I quit my job, I didn't just quit my job to stay at home with my son. I wanted to do something. I have had this inner dialogue with myself for years about there's got to be more for me. Like I'm got to be here for a reason. Like, what is that reason? And so what I did when I had that time is I took a break, which I think take a break, guys, take a break. There's lots of answers in space. But I took a break and I stepped back. And I think one of the most empowering things for me was, so my background is marketing. For 15 years, I was the voice of someone else. I was paid to be the voice of someone else. And so when I left, I got to be the voice of myself, but I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what I stood for. Like, what does Tracy stand for? Ooh, I don't know. I had to take a minute, and not, it didn't just take a minute. Let's be honest. It it became apparent by spending time looking at the things that bring me joy and looking at the things that are frustrating for me and puzzling that together into a place. Like, generally, if something is overly frustrating for you, something that is based on your values, then that is tied to, if you guys are familiar with the book The Alchemist, they talk about a personal legend. And so, like, that's tied into, like, what are you here to do? Um, and it was really interesting, Raven, that you were talking about, like, there's so many things that we just like, our heart is kind of telling us things, but then we're like, oh, but the bills and the blah. And in that book, there's a part where the boy is talking to his heart, and he's saying, like, heart, why have you left me? Like, why are you so quiet? Why aren't you standing up for, like, my personal legend? And the heart is saying that I did, and every time I would tell you these things, you would feel sad. It would hurt you. And so I stopped. I stopped telling you because I don't want to hurt you on purpose. And it's just an interesting when you think about it from that perspective, and that like it just doesn't go away. Like what you're meant to do and what you feel is your calling doesn't necessarily go away. That's why people go through their entire lives feeling like, I but there's more for me, right? And I know it's funny because I experience people, I'm a personal branding coach. And so I experience people at different stages in their journey, right? And some people who are like in their mid 50s and they feel like, oh, I've wasted like 50 years. But then you talk to somebody who's in their 80s and they finally get that and they're like, oh, I wish I had known this when I was 50. And then people who are like in their like, I don't like saying now that I'm middle aged, but in your 30s, is that middle aged? I don't know. Anyway, but like people in their 30s who get it, and the people in their 50s are like, oh, if I had only known this when I was your age, right? And it's never too late to find your calling. And all it really takes is that looking inside. And so, like, again, for me, I knew I wanted to do more than just be a mom, although mom is my favorite job I will ever have. But that's not my only reason for being here. And so I got to explore my other reasons for being there. And I want to share this too, because I think a lot of people miss this. While I was exploring, I took lots of contracts that were not my ideal contract, right? So
Mhm.
like a lot of people are there's kind of these two camps where people are just like take any client, right? Like I'll just like get any client I can get. And there's people like don't take any client who's not your ideal client. There's a journey of you figuring out who your ideal client is. So you can do business in the interim. But if you do business, just be present to what do you like about that, what was fun for you in that contract, what wasn't fun for you, and what could you like if there's so what I found for me, the strategic brand identity piece was the part that is what I loved. And I loved helping people get that clarity. And then I was also writing copy and social media posts and like all these things, which I don't, they're meh for me. They're just like, they're work. And there are people who love to do those things. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to do the coaching. And then if people need the other support, I'll partner with people who love to do that thing. But that was a journey, right? Like that involves you doing some things that you don't want to do, but it also involves a commitment to you to do that once and not turn that into your habit, right? This is what happens
Mm.
with a lot of entrepreneurs is that they take some business they don't really like, then that client wants to keep buying from them, and then that client refers them to a bunch of other people to do that thing that they don't really like, and then all of a sudden they have a booked out business doing things they don't like, and just becomes a job again. And there's like the additional effort of running your own business, so now you really have two jobs instead of the one job you had in your corporate career. um, so it is a fine balance, but there's I mean, like I didn't jump to perfect clients right away. I still have a client who's like paid for part of a package for an email funnel that I don't know if he'll ever use. Because
I
like
like I like that you're or I appreciate really that you're saying like when you get started and you're trying to find your way or figure your way through, it doesn't have to be like an all or nothing, like take all the perfect clients or take no clients or do it all one way. Because I think and this is something I think is important is the process.
yes.
I think oftentimes we and I this is something that my coach tells me all the time, Raven, trust the process. And sometimes when we're so attached to the outcome, we can't learn from within the process. So, what you said that stood out to me as if you get the client or you work with a client, it's like, I'm not really sure this is something I like or something that I prefer to do. Well, what about that experience did you really enjoy? What did you really not enjoy? Or at that entire experience, you really didn't enjoy? Now you know moving forward, I'm not doing this type of work again. Or if it's funnels, if it's writing copy, I am totally, completely done with that type of work. Now I know anybody that presents to themselves, presents to me with that red flag. no, that's not my book of business. So
Yeah.
I think learning from each opportunity or learning from the experience and being willing and open and available to testing some things out. You may find a skill set or a skill set, or you find yourself drawn to something. And for me, I remember like even starting this podcast, and this was like, oh, I had some internal nudge, and then I had another friend that was nudging me to do it. And when I started, I was like, we'll see. And then I found that I really enjoyed it. I was like, oh, this is fun. I'm like meeting people, I'm talking with people. But if I would have like said everything has to be perfect when I start, and I have to have the perfect guest, or I need to be perfect or know exactly how the direction of this, I wouldn't have leaned into it. And sometimes there's certain situations where you may dip a toe at first to see, like, yeah, let me see what I learned from this. Or I could have learned that I don't like podcasting, and that's not going to be the vehicle that I choose to really talk with people and connect with people and network with people. Maybe I need to try blogging. Maybe I need to try something else out. So I appreciate that you said that. I want to know though, when you talked about, you being a personal branding coach, and then you mentioned like copy and social media. So I'm thinking like right now, more I feel like than ever, being an influencer online or social media celebrity or what have you is huge. So is there a difference like between being like an online influencer and discovering your personal brand, or how do they overlap? What are your thoughts on
Oh, this is a great question. I actually did a training on Friday
that?
related to this because a lot of people in the online space are just focusing on their digital image, right?
Mm,
And I don't know about you guys, but when the internet was new and they first had dating sites, maybe I'm dating myself, but like there were all of these accounts that were fake, and people used fake pictures off the internet to just like create these profiles, right? And so there has been this is how the internet has been used, and therefore there's always been this interpretation that there's a difference between how I show up live and how I show up online. And there are a lot of people, and like quite honestly, even some of them who are calling themselves personal branding coaches, who are going to show you the ways you should show up online to get the followers or get the likes or get the whatevers. That that's not necessarily related to your personal brand, right? Your personal brand is about so for one, your personal brand is whole and complete as it is right now. You do not need any more certification or any more experience or any more whatever, different kinds of clothes or different kind of hair to be who you are and to own your space. So you need to figure out what that is for you, but you don't have to be any different in order to do that. You don't need anything else. You don't need someone else to turn you into something.
mm,
You don't need a master's degree. You don't need that. You have a whole and complete personal brand today. Me, so like as a personal branding coach, I'm not going to come in and give you a bunch of things. I'm going to mine. I like to call myself a gold miner. I come in and I mine for the gold, right? Because all the gold is in you right now. You just don't, it's not top of mind for you. Or most often it's just like so innately part of who you are that you don't even think it makes you different than other people. You just
mm.
think everybody's like that. And it's never the case.
What's like,
um,
I have a question. What's like an example of that? Of like, it's just something that you've worked with a client before, and it's something like innately in them, and it's like they don't even recognize it.
Yeah. So I have a really great example. I'm working with this lady right now. And we go through, so my first session that I do with my clients is called Find Simplicity in Your Story. And what I do is you tell me your story, all the parts of it. You start where you want, but you tell me everything. And so what I do with that information is I look for patterns, right? So I look for patterns in your families, the type of stories you tell about your family, the type of stories you tell about your work, the type of stories you tell about what makes you proud. And I pull out the things that I see are a consistent theme throughout them all. And so my one client, we're working through this, and I was like, oh, like I can really see that the thing that always comes out in every story is connection, right? And the client was like, oh, I'm all about connection. And it was so weird because it's not like, if I had written all the notes and given the notes back and asked them to look at like how many times, like circle the words that happen more than once. And like, oh, connection. Oh, that is what I'm all about. Right. And like, oh, that's pretty relevant as a relationship coach, right? Like you're not just about like dealing with divorce or dealing with this or dealing with the aspects of the relationship. You're about human connection. And that's why you care about being a relationship coach, right? Like it just is. So that's an example. And that's what I mean. Like when they think about it, they're like, oh, yeah. But you didn't tell me that when I asked you what you were
Mm.
all about because it's subconscious, right? Like, but this is how you are. This is how you showed up throughout your entire life. And that is, there are these scenarios, and all of us have them. We're trying to show up to be a specific way, right? Like we're trying to be professional or we're trying to
Why is that?
be.
Is that just like what we've like seen on in media, or we the stories we tell ourselves, or the stories someone else has told us? What?
it, it's a variety of things, but it's all external factors, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes it's in your life, right? So okay, I'm gonna do I gotta do a book report, and then I gotta go stand up front and present it, and what present it looks like, right? Like I don't know about you or anybody who's listening, but like I went to business school. When you go to school, you wear whatever, your normal clothes. When you do a presentation, you wear a suit. And I don't think anybody told you that. That was just like your expectation. So then you wear a suit and then you get into your corporate career. And when you do a presentation, you wear a suit. Right now, today, I'm not wearing a suit. Right? Like that's, I don't wear suits. That doesn't feel comfortable for me at all, ever. Right? It's just, I don't know. Everybody gets, there's just external factors, and some of these things don't seem like a big deal, right? So we don't like really question them. Like, oh, I'm going to go do a
That's a
presentation.
good point, though, you're making. I remember when I was in school, we had to wear uniforms, and I remember being annoyed. Like, I remember being I'm like, "Why do I have to dress like everyone else?" And I wouldn't say that I was, like, super fashionista or into clothing to that degree, but I found it so, like, conform I remember being, like, a child thinking I was like, this is silly."
And I mean, like, I like partially they do it so that people don't uh, compete that way, right? And like, but I actually went to private school for a while too. And so we had the, like you have the mandatory dress code, but I always wore these. So you had to wear a dress shirt, but I always wore these dress shirts with huge collars. And I was like the only one who wore these big collars. Everyone else wore just like the normal like collars, right? And or like t-shirt underneath. And I had these like big frilly collars because that was still allowed, right? Like it was within the requirements, but no one else had it. And it was like my favorite thing. That was my way I got to stand out. But this is the thing, right? Like even in those scenarios, we don't. It's not in the entire education system. We don't celebrate individuality. The way we teach
Mhm.
people is all the same, right? Like everyone gets the same curriculum, everyone gets the same exam, everybody's the same, right? Like the private school is a little bit worse on that front because you generally have uniforms and everything too. Like at least in public school, you kind of get to like wear what you want. But even then, right? Like I went to private school and public school. And when I was in public school, there was, I don't know, and I don't know if this was just a Canadian thing, but when Club Monaco had their like big monogram sweatshirts, and like everybody had one. And if you didn't have a Club Monaco monogram sweatshirt, you like couldn't even exist. You would be the most embarrassed person ever. You just shouldn't show up at school, right? Like, and so everybody had to have it. And I'm sure they're like $60 for a sweatshirt, right? For a junior high kid, right? Totally ridiculous. Anyways, that was the thing, right? So like it's not necessarily a school uniform, but they're still like the uniform
Yeah, like
of
the social expectations or something. Yeah.
right. And so this is the thing, right? Like this is just society is built on these principles. They're even up to the point where like resumes, right? Like the template of resumes is written
Mm.
to compare apples to apples, right? Like it's not meant for people to stand out, right?
No,
Like
especially with the what is it, like, the applicant tracking system? It's like, "Oh, well, then your resume won't be read, so don't do anything, like, funky or outside of the box because the system won't accept it." Exactly.
I know, like, so like all of these things are based on just making people the same. And I don't know why it's like that, but it is like that. And we all grew up in this society of everybody being the same. And then everybody trying to stand out from the crowd by being like, I have a bachelor's of commerce degree. I don't know. Like, I don't even know how many people have a bachelor's of commerce degree. I don't even know how many people have a bachelor's of commerce degree with an honors in marketing from the University of Alberta, right? Like a lot of people, right? Like that doesn't make me unique. That says nothing about me. And so we just don't like we just created this society that doesn't celebrate individuality, and personal branding doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in that world. It's actually interesting. I wrote a I think Forbes, I believe Forbes is a reliable source of information most of the time. But I came across this article about how to climb the corporate ladder in Forbes. And I read it and I was like, this is a disaster. Like, this is what we're teaching kids in business school is how you become successful in your career. And at least half of these things are not possible. Like you can't celebrate your personal brand and do that thing. Right. So now
Mm.
I've decided I'm going to trade myself and who I am for this, for someone else's expectations. And it just is, it's so dangerous for us to, this is what I'm out to do, is to change people's understanding of what it is, because it's not dangerous. Like it's not dangerous to celebrate the fact that I love to bake and I love to vacation in the mountains, and that to be a human requires me to be multidimensional. And so if I can work, whether that's in a career or as an entrepreneur, supporting that and say like I am human and sometimes humans need to take a break. We're not robots, right? Like my sister's a lawyer and I'm just like, you cannot work a person 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and expect them to be a functioning human, let alone a functioning lawyer, right? Like, this is crazy. It is crazy that we are still doing this. And so,
Well, I wanna
okay.
know, though, how do you take ownership or, as you said, celebrate your personal brand? And then also too, how do you leverage that? When you mentioned, the client that found or that you all discovered the pattern of connection. So how do you leverage that as a business owner, or as someone who, is an employee? Once you find, "Okay, this is who I am, this is my truest self. This is me doing me." How do you take that into the work environment or as an entrepreneur and make that work for you or be and something advantageous for you?
Mhm. Okay, I'm going to start with find, and then we'll do celebrate, and then we'll do
Okay.
leverage. So, because this is the important thing, right? We're living in this environment that isn't made for us to connect to our personal brand.
Mhm.
And therefore, you have to remove yourself and put yourself into a different environment in order to be able to do that. My favorite thing, and like quite honestly, people tend to have problems implementing this at least 10 minutes at a time. But I have this challenge that I have my clients do, which is called 10 minutes on purpose.
Okay.
And what that is about is taking 10 minutes every day, because I believe everybody has 10 minutes, no matter who you are, if you take it on purpose. So the on purpose is like the dual meaning, right? Like you're doing it on purpose. I'm deliberately taking this time. And two, to celebrate your purpose. This
Okay.
is this is not, people don't do this. Nobody does it. And even when I tell people to do it who have had this, like, oh, this is what I'm all about, it feels hard. Like, it feels hard to do it for more than like 45 seconds, a minute, because we feel like it's self-centered, or like, am I kind of cocky because and we have like all of these negative connotations with a lot of these words, right? Like, even people who, I had a conversation once with a lady on Facebook who was saying that her daughter was strong-willed, and there was all these bad things associated with that. And I'm like, ooh, there could be a lot of like good things associated with being strong-willed. And she was not. I wasn't her coach, so she was not open to receiving my perspective. But we have all of these definitions of things that, like, I don't want to be seen as egotistical or arrogant or any of those things, right? So then we don't celebrate ourselves. But that, it's kind of crazy, because we we are, every one of us is uniquely situated to help specific people do a specific thing.
Mm.
And there, it's because of who we are and our experience and what else we were going through when we went through that experience, right? Like, the value that I got from my university degree, someone who had the exact same thing with the exact same classes with the exact same grades, right, like, got something different out of that experience, because they had a different set of friends, they had different family issues going on, they lived in a different place, right? Like, everyone has a unique experience, and that can uniquely help other people. And so, like, one, believing that is important. But two, this is why this environment, like getting yourself in an environment of people who believe that, of people who are celebrating that, um, and like, show up every day to say, like, hey, we're all great and we're all imperfect, and that is great. And we're growing and we're learning and we're evolving and we're helping. And next week I'm going to be different, because I'm going to learn more things. I always say that there's certain things I come across, like certain challenges, and I'll be like, that's a future Tracy problem. Future Tracy will be
Mm.
much better situated to deal with that problem. So I'm just leave it for her. And it's not procrastinating. I don't have to deal with it right now. So it's not procrastination. It's just that, like, I'm going to know more tomorrow. I'm going to know more 3 months from now. So if it's not an issue today, I don't really have to deal with it today. Um, but really, it is the that time. So your 10 minutes on purpose, what it gives you is an opportunity to connect with the things in your life that bring you joy. And so it's the times to celebrate, like, what you got from your family experience that brought you joy today. It's what did you get from your work experiences that gave you joy today. Those moments of joy. And I always say two moments of frustration, but I don't want you to spend 10 minutes being frustrated about things. But your moments of frustration also show you that you're passionate about something. And so being able to consciously take a minute and say, like, hey, okay, like, I really love a hot cup of tea. All right. Like, could you have a hot cup of tea every day? Probably. Right? Like, these are some things that we just don't take the time to acknowledge, and then taking the time to celebrate that. Like, I'm I just want you guys to imagine this for a minute. Like, what if every person on the planet, maybe minus the like super egotistical, narcissistic people, because they're probably doing it anyway. What if we could all take a minute and just say, like, I'm pretty great. Like, I think I'm pretty smart. I am pretty good at this. I'm like, I'm a really nice person. Like, I'm always there to help another human, right? Like, what if what if we took the time to embrace that about ourselves? How much easier would the next thing you have to do feel? Right? So if I took, even if I say 10 minutes, but like, even if you took 1 minute You took 1 minute, 60 seconds out of your day to say, like, you know what? I just killed that sales call, or I just like killed that podcast interview, right? Like, and just celebrate that. And then, like, how much better are you going to do the next thing, even if the next thing you have to do is something that you don't necessarily like doing? Dishes, washing the toilet, doing your accounting, right? Like, these are all things that I don't like. But like, you can't in your life get rid of the all the things you don't want to do, right? But you can influence, like, you can feed your energy with the things that give you joy. And therefore, the other things don't feel nearly as hard.
I
And so,
like that. I like
yeah.
that. I think that what I'm really hearing you say, or what I'm taking from it myself, is that reconnect with yourself. Like, one of the best relationships, authentic connections, is reconnecting with yourself, as well as embracing yourself, celebrating yourself, and not being afraid to pat your own self on the back. Yeah, I just killed that. Yeah, I'm actually a really great person. I'm consistent, I'm persistent, I'm a great friend, and really celebrating all of the beautiful things that make you who you are. And when you talked about, like, there's nothing that you have to change or be or put anything um, external on, whether it be clothing or changing your hair or your makeup or whatever, really being comfortable with self and loving self, and finding those great things about you. I thought it was interesting too when you made the analogy of when you go to college and you get X, Y, and Z degree. Well, every single person that was getting that degree got something different out of it. They got a
Mhm.
different experience out of it. They learned something different from it. And I never thought about that because I have a biology degree, and I'm like, oh, biology is biology. But there are other people I know that went to the same university as me, were there the same time frame, and their experience was different from me. What they learned was different from me. What they took away from it was different. So embracing what you bring to the table, I think that, and I don't know if we're not taught that. That's not
No.
something that's like, okay, Raven's great because she does X well, or Tracy is phenomenal at Y, and that is part of your being and part of, what attribute you bring to the team, this world, your family. That's not celebrated. If anything,
No.
we're taught or trained or conditioned, fit in, blend in, be quiet, be like everyone else. And now I think it's, when I was talking earlier about like social media, now there's this big push of, how are you standing out? How are you getting attention? How are you getting likes? But then, as you mentioned, is that the real you? Or is that the facade or the face that you're showing for social media? Like, if I met you in person, would I be like, who's that?
See, and this is the point, and this is why, like, having that foundation of clarity in your personal brand, it can help in that, right? Like, this is where, like, consistency. People always
Mm,
say consistency, right? In terms of marketing, consistency doesn't come from posting every day or a lot of the things that the industry tells you. What consistency comes from is every time you show up, it feels the same. So I can show up
mm,
on a podcast, or I can show up on my LinkedIn profile, or I can show up on my Facebook group, or I can show up at a live networking event, and I'm the same. You're not gonna like watch me somewhere and be like, oh, that feels different. No, because I show up as my authentic self in all the
mm,
places. And without knowing, like without having that knowledge of what your deep down personal brand is, you can't create that consistency, because someone's going to say you should just do this, and you're like, that sounds like a good idea, and then you do it like they would do it, but it doesn't feel authentic for you because you're not doing it the way you would do it, but you haven't done the work to figure out what way would I do it. Like, I don't know what way I would do it, and maybe it's a new way. I'm a big fan of like the new way. If no one's heard of it, then that's the way I want to do it. But not everybody is as excited about being that unique. But that's why there's also so many options, right? Like there's so many sales strategies and marketing tactics, right? Like there's so many different ones. Like you said yourself, right? Like, I'm going to try the podcast and maybe I'll like the podcast. Maybe I won't like the podcast. It's great. You like a podcast, do a podcast. You don't like a podcast, don't do a podcast. Really, you don't have to do a podcast, but you can. You don't have to have a Facebook group, but you can, right? Like, and it's just like picking those things. And something I speak really heavily to as well is curating your environment, right? So like you have ideal clients on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest and TikTok and Clubhouse. But you don't have to show up on all of those. You can show up on the one you like. Like I like LinkedIn, so I show up on LinkedIn. Why? Because it feels easier for me to show up on LinkedIn because I like the platform, right? Like I quit Instagram because I can't, it was like too much work for me. It felt really hard to find images that would help me tell my story. And sometimes I just want to tell the story. I don't want to have an image. And so Instagram doesn't let me do that. So I said, peace out, Instagram, right? Like, and that's fine. All of that is fine. But there's so much still like external. You should do this. You should just do this. Like, you need to have, like, monetize your Facebook group. Oh my God, I can't have a business unless I have a Facebook group. You guys, like, there have been lots of productive businesses before Facebook even existed. So you don't have to have a Facebook group to have a successful business. None of this is true. And so, like, one of the things, and again, when we talk about leveraging your personal brand into making these types of decisions, right? Like, knowledge about your personal brand is knowledge about what's right for you, but two, it gives you the confidence to make the decision about what's right for you. Because especially if you're like have a people pleaser background, and I have a people pleaser background myself, right? Like, it's easy to say like, oh, this is what other people want, this is what other people expect from me, so I will do that. But every time you do that, unless you get excited about saying, yeah, that feels like a really good, authentic representation of who I am as a person, you're not going to be your fully productive self doing those things either, right? If someone is like, have a Facebook group, and you're like, okay, I have a Facebook group, and then you have this Facebook group, and then you hate showing up in your Facebook group. And then guess what the people in your Facebook group feel? They hate it because you hate it, right? Like, that's the energy you've created in your Facebook group. And so, like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I have a Facebook group. I say that about Facebook. I have a Facebook group. I love my Facebook group. My Facebook group is curated around how I want it to be. I'm about people owning their personal brand. I show up the way I like to show up. I like to show up live. I like long form content. So I write a blog, right? Like, I put the links to my blog in my Facebook group, but it's built around the way I like to show up as a human. And guess who hangs out there? The people who like that. The people who don't like that don't come to my Facebook group, and that's fine, because I show up this way and they show up because they like that I show up that way. So I could fake it. But then guess what? The people who show up like the fake me. That's not anywhere close to your ideal clients, right? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, you can't maintain that either.
No.
And one of the things you just said too was people never know what they're going to get. And it doesn't feel authentic if they see you in a different environment or on a different medium. They're like, who's that? Where's Tracy? Does she have a twin or a sister or an imposter? No, that is so good. I'm glad that you brought that up. Again, I think that goes back to that. It sounds like I'm hearing you say personal branding is a large component of personal branding is self-awareness.
Yes.
That was phenomenal. And you talked about LinkedIn. So it's good to know when you said that, like, for you, there's a difference between where you'd like to be up and where you'd like to show up.
Yeah.
So that's a great segue and to my final two questions. First question is, how can we find you online?
Or you can find me on LinkedIn. So you can find me under Tracy Borreson on LinkedIn. I like is my platform of choice. I mostly like it because like I feel I can show up as my opinionated self there and people like that about me. And this is what I would highly encourage for all of you guys too. Like if you like Instagram, do Instagram. That's fine. Just because Tracy doesn't like Instagram, let's I'm not here to try and tell you choose LinkedIn because I'm on LinkedIn, right? Like this is my place for me. The other thing, and I did mention it, so I write a blog. You can find it on my website, tlbcoaching.com. I write about everything personal brand. I love to bust things like Forbes articles, freebies that are given away by like the really big names. That aren't going to work for you. So yeah, if you've downloaded Amy Porterfield Ideal Client Avatar Worksheet and it didn't work for you, you should read my blog because it'll tell you why. um, those are my channels of choice.
Awesome, awesome. And final question, what is the biggest lesson you've learned in your reset?
My biggest lesson is that I am good. That I am good just the way I am. And like, I use the word good to be humble, to be honest with you. Like, I'm pretty great. And it's okay. It's okay to celebrate your great. It's not like I'm throwing a parade for myself, right? Like and asking people to shoot confetti, right? Like I am celebrating myself within me, right? Like who I am and what I've gone through and what that has turned me into and what I can be and what I can do with that, the impact I can have on people and what I can do in this world because of who I am. And so that's what I would love for everyone to take away from this episode is that you are great. And if you don't believe it, then I believe it and at least someone believes it. And I'm pretty great, so I don't just make things up. So you should probably believe me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, you are great. You are phenomenal. And yes, you're being humble about it. So I appreciate you today. This was wonderful as expected. All right, everyone. Wonderful conversation. I told you all, Tracy is a powerhouse. Your personal brand is whole and complete as it is right now. Be who you are and own your space. The gold is in you. Every one of us is uniquely situated. And if you received value from this episode and know someone else who would, share it. Share it with your community. And I challenge everyone to do the 10 minutes on purpose challenge and reconnect with what brings you joy. Because remember, a reset is always available to you.